Hello, Dan. Welcome to the podcast. How are you, my friend?
Hey, Avish, what's going on, man? It's good to see you again. What's
Likewise,
happening?
likewise. It's great to have you on my podcast, which is brand
Yeah,
spanking new. After I was a guest on your podcast, which was a ton of fun, and we are
yeah.
going to get into that. But you've got quite an interesting background. You've done a number of things, and
hmm
rather than me sort of butchering it and leaving things out, for people who are listening who don't know who you are, could you just give us like another 30 to 60 second kind of
Yeah.
overview of the Dan Nestle story?
It's very hard to keep it to 30, 60 seconds, as you'll know from the course of our discussions and certainly the way this is going to go. I'm a little bit of a talker. But yeah, I am Dan Nestle, and I'm a marketing communications leader, professional expert, whatever you want to call it. Very focused in like comms innovation, the areas of communications technology, corporate communications, and how that and integrated communications, in other words, the kind of connection between communications and marketing and all of that. And I guess what that really means is I like to tell stories on behalf of other people, and and use technology and embrace technology as a way to really enable those stories, and certainly distribute and amplify all of those stories, to a
Hmm.
certain end. So I've had a career in, my career has most in the most recent several decades has been in marketing and communications, but I started out as a teacher in Japan, lived in Japan for 16 years, wasn't teaching the whole time, did a couple of different jobs, and eventually just landed on the fact that I really like writing. I really like storytelling, and putting messages and words together. So I started building a small business that way, and that eventually led to corporate, being hired by a corporation, and then spent the last, I don't know, 20 years maybe in corporate environments
Hmm.
doing variations of communications, marketing communications, etc. And then in recent years, I've been very focused on, I'm very industry agnostic. So I've been in accounting, I've been in um, business services, I've been in on the PR agency side. Uh,
Now you're
very,
saying these are
very,
the types of groups you worked for, or this is the type of work
yeah,
you've done?
yeah. I've done communications and marketing work for these kinds of
Oh,
industries
gotcha.
and
So you were
groups,
not
right?
doing accounting yourself. You were working
No,
for accounting groups. Got it. Okay.
no, and what I've always found is like I've been told that I have this unearthly curiosity. It's one of those things, and I just call it ADHD, but it is what it is. I'm a very curious person. And curiosity lends itself really, really well to being a creative, and also to, to kind of learning very quickly about businesses or clients or people, and, getting really interested in their stories and being able to tell their stories. So whether it's for an executive somewhere, or for a rocket ship, or for a forklift, or for a toilet. And I'm not joking about any of these things. I've done, communications for heavy industries, energy, oil and gas, uh, aerospace, and more recently, I'm late of Lixil. I left the company a short time ago, but that was all about kitchen and bath and water technology. And
Hmm.
it's really fascinating to go. Like, one of the fortunate things about being in communications and in marketing is that very transferable, kind of set of skills. And as long as you find clients and companies that are looking for someone to, you know, basically get up to speed and tell their stories in a specific way, or boost their profiles and such, and have the patience to let them learn, then you can be, you can learn so much about so many things so quickly. I mean, I'm not about to do a spreadsheet or a balance sheet, but I can tell you about accounting. I just can't. I'm just not an accountant.
Well, I like to dig
Yeah.
into that idea of the story thing.
Mm-hmm.
As you know, my whole thing is yes and saying yes and instead of yes but, and I find that
Yeah.
to me one of these yes and goes very hand in hand with is digging deeper and being curious, because anytime someone mentions something about what they're doing, sometimes your mind will go to yeah but, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
that doesn't relate to me, or just saying oh that's nice, like yeah that's nice, and the and piece is where you dig deeper. So share with me a little bit about for a lot of people listening, especially if they don't have a storytelling or marketing background, this idea of like the story behind
Mhm.
bath, kitchen fixtures, accounting, like
Anything.
how what kind of stories are you talking about? How does that have a story and how is that important? Why is that important?
I mean, when we say a story, we're talking about basically a mode of communication, like a way to get a message through to a person or to somebody else on the other end. And story is the capsule, right? Story is the vehicle, and a story basically is almost anything that has a beginning, a middle, and an end on the most basic level,
Mm-hmm.
so that it's understandable by the person who is the recipient. If you go out and you just give a random statement, like you said, yes, and well,
Mm-hmm.
without context and without like an understanding of where that comes from, where it's going, and why it's important, there's no story. So that's the story, right? The story I'm talking about is creating for lack of a better word, a narrative. And it
Mm-hmm.
could be just a few sentences, or it could be pages and pages, or it could be a whole, ebook or whatever. But creating a narrative that makes that understandable and accessible to whatever your audience is. And you have to, you got to tailor that message and tailor the story to whatever audience you're talking about. Now, I know that still sounds kind of high level, and I guess it is, but in practical terms, you would say something like you'd have a typical product or a service from a company, and I'll just use an example from my past. We had when I worked for a company, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, a while back, and I'm picking them because there were so many fascinating products and services that they did. And there's this one really completely, for the vast majority of people, totally uninteresting. Nobody would really care except the people who are really kind of focused on this stuff. We had a subsidiary company that did compressors. And I don't mean like the kind of little small thing you put in a fridge. I mean big, giant gas compressors, industrial compressors. These things weighed up to hundreds of tons, and it's a giant piece of industrial technology that basically takes, on one end, it takes a gas of some kind,
Mm-hmm.
and then it compresses it so that at the other end it becomes liquid, right?
Yeah.
Or a more compact version of that gas. So it's taking something and making it into small. So the application of these things are used for heavy industries like energy, or like think of liquefied natural gas, right? It gets liquefied because it comes in as natural gas and it has to go through compressors to get liquefied, right? So you have to put, so that's and that in itself is sort of a little story. But anyway, you could talk about a compressor by talking about the fan blade, the blades on the rotor, or you can talk about how heavy it is, or the materials it's made from, right? These are all like products. These are all benefits or statistics or tech specs. And most people cannot relate to that. And certainly if you're one of those, if you're in the market for something like that, that doesn't tell you anything really about the efficiency of the product, or it doesn't tell you anything about, the people making the product, or doesn't give you any affinity with the product or the company. So you might as well just buy a commodity product, right?
Mm-hmm.
In this case, we had this big rotor blade and like a part of a compressor, and the company brought them in. One of the things that the company did was bring in compressors and fix them, right? Compressor repair was part of the business, repair and storage. So you have to imagine that you have these giant things that are anywhere, tons. They weigh tons, and you need a fairly big warehouse or factory essentially, to work on them. Like I said, very high levels of technology, like machine to the micrometer, big blades and so on. Well, this completely unromantic business,
Mm-hmm.
right? Rotor blades. We're in a factory one day, and a couple folks from Japan are there visiting. Now, full disclosure, I wasn't there, but I saw this whole thing on video, and this is all part of what I did. But this rotor is in the middle of the of the floor, and it's there for repairs or whatever. This guy comes out in a very well worn work, like overalls and coveralls, a worker, like a Japanese guy, in a blue coveralls. His name is stitched on the corner, and he's got protective goggles on, and he's got a little tool belt. He's an engineer, but he opens up the tool belt, and he stands in front of the rotor, and he rolls out the tools. Remember, we're talking about a piece of technology that is, again, process, like milled to the micrometer. It's high carbon steel, all this kind of good stuff. This guy takes out what looks like 300-year-old tools, like a hammer that could have been forged from iron in the Tokugawa age, or something like really old stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And he rolls the stuff out, puts in his earplugs, so he's so whatever, he's not exposed to too much noise, and he kind of stands behind the compressor, the rotor blades, right?
Mm-hmm.
Feels it with his hands, like places his hands upon it, and then he takes that hammer, and he starts to, like, in a very rhythmic way, tap on these rivets that are holding the blades in place, right? So you can, it's hard to picture, but imagine this very big piece of machinery. It's like a giant fan, imagine. And the fan blades are held in place by bolts, by rivets, right? This big piece of machinery is going to go in a power plant or something somewhere. This guy comes out with a little hammer. He's just tapping the different rivets. And what we saw there is that's a story. Okay. You have a piece of technology, but then you have an artisan, a craftsman, who is doing something that we had to explore, figure out what that was. But he's doing something that clearly was not part of like any industrial process that anybody had seen. So why is he doing this? What is the point? What's happening here? How do we answer those questions? And when you answer those questions, you have a story. Mm-hmm. And that story then becomes part of the brand of the item. It becomes, in a very commercial sense, another reason to maybe be interested and buy the product. But it also, like, feeds into the heritage of the product itself, or of the process, and it feeds into employee morale, everything. So we have this guy out there. He's doing this little, he's tapping this thing with his hammer, and what we learned was he's doing something called peening. And I didn't know that word before then, and I've really never had occasion to use it since. But he's taking a hammer, and he's like tapping the rivets to kind of make a small, slight little bevel onto rivets to make sure that they stay in there more firmly, and that machine sings. And I got to tell you, I don't know how many rivets were on that thing, 100, 200, I don't know. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them, when he was done, was perfectly beveled around with a kind of like, this just a beautiful edge. You'd think a machine did it, but no, it was this guy. And it turns out that there's 8 people in the world who can do this.
Wow.
He is one of them. That's what he does. He goes place to place, and he just peens rivets, or whatever the right verb is.
He's the beveler.
He's the beveler. So we create a story out of this. All right. It's a story about artisanship, about old and new, about the importance of keeping the human in the loop in a technology, in a high tech manufacturing environment. It's about what the human eye can see that a machine can't see. So, from beginning to end, it becomes, a beautiful piece of machinery that is normally done by machine, but we have these great artisans that are amazing and that do these, do this ancient work that makes it even better. And, his name is such and such, and this is why he's great. And you talk about that. And then you at the very end of the story, it's therefore this is a product that's so unique and stands above everything else, So you have this arc.
Mm-hmm.
that's focused on the person. And then out of that, you have these mini arcs like, what's the story of this guy, right? What's the story of, and where is this particular machine going to go? Where'd it come from? Where's it going to go? Right? What does the client say about this? What does the customer say about this? The person who paid millions of dollars for this, what, you know, what is the, what's the advantage? So you have all these different elements that can then be woven into any number uh, of, of narratives, of advertisements, of blog posts, you know, go and on the story goes on. So I realized I talked for a long time about that, but you know, it's a simple story. It just, that's the way it happens, you know, and sometimes it's simpler than that. Sometimes it's just simply, you know, you have an employee who's done great things and you can just talk about them.
So it's real true, because even as you were just going through that story, like I definitely wasn't super interested when you were just talking about the compressors and the fans and the certain material, right? But as soon as you start talking about this guy, it goes talk about curiosity, right? You talk about you being curious, but that's really what stories are. Stories, I read it once because I do a lot of writing. I you know, do fiction and stuff, and someone said all stories are mysteries. Like it's not, it doesn't have to be a mystery, you know, who done it, but all stories raise a question of either what happened or what's going to happen, and then the person gets curious. And just a story about, oh, what's this guy doing out there with his little hammer? So it's, and so the next question, which you start answering, is it's one thing to find and create the story, but if it's just sitting on a shelf, it does nothing. So then you got to get it out there. So is this something you did in the form of press releases or just on the website or blog posts, or like how do you get these stories out there?
In this particular instance, it was really serendipitous. Like we didn't know that this was going to happen. So we, you know, had this wonderful colleague who was on site at the time, and she had a video crew there. They just happened to be doing something different. She grabbed the crew and said, "You need to film this." So we captured it on video and created a 2.5 or 3 minute video. Brilliant. I'll share it. I'll share it with you.
Yeah, and I'll put a link.
You can put it in the link. It is a gorgeous piece of storytelling, of visual storytelling, and even the words are terrific. And you know, it was then posted to our channels, and it was distributed through, like, we publicized it through social media. We publicized it through you know, through client and customer communications with that, for that business, you know. But again, this is a very esoteric, small kind of niche business. I mean, it's not a small business, but it's a niche business. So it's not like it has mass appeal, but that story itself definitely has the visuals of it have appeal to so many. Even if you don't know what's going on, it's like, oh wow, that's beautiful. I can't believe this guy. What's he doing? So, so it did have a lot of appeal across various channels. So we put it out there on YouTube. We put it out there across a bunch of different channels. And you know, this was like, you know, 7 or 8 years ago, I guess. So even now, the tools and technology available to specifically target audiences and get the most out of those stories are even far more advanced now than they were then. And then they were pretty advanced, you know.
Oh yeah, now anyone can. So, well, and it's interesting because I come in and out of doing various video social media platforms, be it YouTube or TikTok or something. Because as a speaker, you know, the more video I can get out there, the better.
Yeah.
And it's another lesson, is that it's one thing for me to get out there and say, here's how to use yes and, here's how to think quickly. But the more you can wrap it into story, the more engaged people get.
Yeah.
So let's bring this down. You know, you're talking about a giant compressor fan, a giant company. And some people listening are going to be leaders, marketing, comm people in big corporations. A lot, though, are going to be more small business, solo business.
Sure.
Or even just people who are interested on a personal level. So how, and do you see, is there a way, and how can people use this on a more individual level? So not just a corporate brand story, but a personal, a professional level. How can individuals use these same ideas?
So I think there's a couple of elements here, right, that people have to be aware of. And you know, I love the art, or the kind of the process of storytelling and of narrative development, et cetera. I'm by no means the leading expert in this, but I like to grab from some of the experts. And there's one expert that I really love as an accessible kind of who's created a very accessible framework for anybody to create a great story. All right. And it is a little bit, I'd like to see how this jives with yes and,
Okay.
because the story itself has a big but in the middle, right?
Yeah.
It has to have a but, although you don't have to say but, you could say something different. But and there, a simple framework. I mean, you said a story is a mystery, right? Well, create a mystery, whether it's about yourself, about you can see I have like hats in the background, a picture. It doesn't, a big compressor. It doesn't matter. This, I call it maybe the best starters framework I've ever seen. But you'd never have to have another framework again. It's called the ABT, the and, but, therefore framework. And a fellow named Park. Oh my goodness! Why am I blanking on Park's name? I'm sorry. I'm gonna look behind me for a second. I'll get the information to you for. I don't know what's going on. Park's gonna kill me because we're actually friends. But he's created this with a colleague of his. The ABT framework. And if you go to businessofstory.com, for example, you'll be able to find any of the information. But the idea is you start off with a little bit of context. That's your and story. The world is the world is changing, and everybody needs and everybody need. I'm just making something up off as we go. But let's say something like the world is changing, and everyone needs to protect themselves from the sun. Okay, so this is an and, right? The world is changing, and we know that everybody needs to protect themselves from the sun. But it's getting increasingly difficult, right, to know what's the best way to protect yourself, and and you can go on, right? But it's increasingly difficult to find a good way to stay out of this as climate change happens, and so on and so forth. But therefore, what you really need is a brand new, gorgeous, the trending communicator hat to protect your head from the sun. It has all the elements you need, blah, blah, blah. Terrible story, but you get the idea, right?
Yeah.
I gave it context, right? The world's changing, right? But it's really hard to cope with that change. Therefore, here's something that's going to help you cope with that change. So that is probably, I should have said that to begin with, but that's probably like a really good way to kind of look at things. So you can do an and, but, therefore for anything, as long as you have an idea of what your offering is, what's unique about you, what's interesting about what you're talking about, and what it is about you or your career, or what it is about your business. You can start off with creating a whole lot of different ABT statements to find something that really resonates, because they're not very hard to create, despite the fumbles that I just had. Because even though I said I'm a storyteller and a curious person, I'm not an on the spot creator all the time. But
you don't have to be. It's
but you can but even then, right? I would have probably thought about it a little more. But then you have now, in addition to that, you have so many tools available to you that can then turbocharge that ABT or that framework. Okay. And you can choose other frameworks, anything with a beginning, middle, and an end. I mean, there's a lot of different frameworks out there. I'm just going to use that one as my main go-to. Park Howell, by the way. Park Howell.
Yeah, and I like that because it is,
Sorry,
most stories are done as 3-act structures. There's the what you want, the obstacle to get it, and whether you get it or not. And this is kind of a variation on that. I like this is a little bit more business focused, with the therefore being kind of the solution, which I like.
And you can replace those words with words that mean the same thing, or you can, once you get used to it, you can play with the structure and do different syntaxes and, kind of play around, and you can expand different sections and do nested things and so on. But what I was going to then say, though, is that today, even for the small business owner, for the person who doesn't have a lot of time to do these writing and to kind of come up with all these things, right? now we have incredible tools available to us that can give you 500 examples in seconds, right? And of
Yeah,
course,
this
I'm
is
talking
something
about
I wanted
generative
to talk.
AI.
I want to talk more with you about because you
Yeah,
are you've been doing a lot with AI lately,
yeah.
as lately as in like the last few months or year.
Hmm.
Even I was kind of going before the prep. I was going through your podcast episodes, and about a year
Yeah,
ago, it was general talking to corporate leaders, executives, or
yep,
experts on marketing, communications. And the last however many episodes, all like how to use AI, and here's the challenge with AI. And
right.
so
That's
this
right.
is an area you really jumped
Yeah.
into, and you probably know as much about
Hmm.
it as most people I know.
Well, I kind of came up with my own story in some ways, right? Like this is maybe illustrative of how a lot of, I guess, independent people in small businesses go about doing things. And, I started off as the Dan Nestle Show. My podcast was the Dan Nestle Show, which was really, kind of general. I mean, I had an idea that I just wanted to have great conversations with great people, but that's
Mm-hmm.
a little vague. And I just gravitated more towards people in marketing and people in personal development, people I was interested in. And I got a lot of people in, a lot of coaches, a lot of folks who were, in marketing communications and so on. And including you, Avish, you were on the show.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but then, I got a better hold of my story, which was that I have this background and this experience in the world of communications and an insatiable curiosity for technology, right? But so many people in my profession and so many people out there don't know how to cope with it. They don't know they don't know what to do with it. They're afraid for their lives, right? They're afraid for their jobs. Therefore, I started the Trending Communicator to offer, at least I'm going to mix metaphors, but to offer a paddle in the canoe or boat that they're kind of going down the river on, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the Trending Communicator is there to help people cope with all of this change by talking with experts who are looking to the future and solve and coming up with different solutions or information. And you see, I packaged that, and that was actually not too bad of a story. The way I packaged, I just did a whole big ABT there for you.
Yeah.
Um, when I narrowed into the Trending Communicator, it turns out that what's happening now is a lot of work with AI. So maybe 7 out of the last 10 guests I've had have been all about AI. And I've been, as you said, in that space now, like really focused on what the heck is going on with generative AI for, well, when did ChatGPT launch? November 30th or December 1st, 2022?
Yes. Oh, was
Since
it that
then.
long ago? Wow.
Yeah.
I don't
It
think I got
seems,
involved until 23, but yeah.
yeah. Yeah. But like the day it was launched, I belong to a really great community of marketers and communicators who are, focused on sharing each other's, sharing learning and the betterment of one another. And these kinds of things, when they happen, I just check my community and it's somebody's on it,
Yeah.
So we were on it from day one. And I really dove in, and I've very much embraced it. And I want to help our profession and help people kind of understand it better,
Well, I
But
want to
anyway,
ask you a
you
few
were saying,
questions
yeah.
about that.
Mhm.
Starting kind of a little higher level first,
Yeah.
there's this line that relates to this, I think, on your LinkedIn profile,
Hmm.
which may also be on your podcast about you page. But your thing saying if you say that change is the only constant, you're doomed.
Yeah,
Because it's not constant, it's accelerating.
that's right.
And I feel like that has really been brought to the forefront with AI because so many people are like, it's the latest trend, it's a new thing, and
Hmm.
so many people because it's different and they don't know it, or they try to use it once one day and are
Yeah.
like, it gave me
Well,
terrible answers. This is a waste.
yeah.
So for people who are maybe a little reluctant or
Hmm.
who are like, it's just everything changes anyways. I don't need to get on this. Like, what is
Right.
your kind of thought about that?
Well, there is a hype cycle to everything, that where you have your early adopters and, this is the most important thing. This is crazy. You got to try this. You got to do this. And you have your early adopters who are going to jump on. And, I'm one of those people. So it's easy to dismiss the hype a little bit with anything new that comes out, because we've been inundated with that for generations, I suppose. But with AI and generative AI, it's a little bit different. I would call it something more akin to the first iPhone, or I'll go even more grandiose and say the printing press. Like I think it's that revolutionary. But there's a couple of things about it that I think will make it either very, very easy to adopt and adapt to, or you'll adapt to it and you won't know it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or you won't adapt. You will kind of, turn your back on it and just sail off into the future of doing something with your hands, and that's fine. That's great if that's what you want to do. The thing is, like, so I do think that it's a different level of change that's upon us. Now it accelerates and slows down a little bit over time, but we're seeing such advances in the way that that the generative AI models, and when I say model, ChatGPT, or maybe if you're into it a little more, Gemini or Claude or these other products, but just ChatGPT seems to be the most common use of this. But these all refer to language models that give you answers to things by some miracle of technology, and there's no miracle involved. It's very straightforward if to a point, like how it happens and why it happens. But at the same time, where it's going and how these models behave is kind of still a mystery. There's a lot of black boxness about this whole thing where we don't know what's happening. But I do think people need to get on board with it, and especially folks who are not just in marketing, communication, or creative professions. Anybody who's running a business, a small business especially, the productivity gains, the efficiency gains, and the, let's call it, opportunity kind of revelations that come from AI are priceless. And when I say, I think everybody can understand productivity gains, right?
Yeah.
You can write an email much faster. You can write a story faster. You can edit documents, do all the things that I think people understand it's good at by now. And if you don't understand that AI is good at, taking on very easy and kind of day-to-day writing tasks and editing tasks, take my word for it, it's very good at that.
Yeah.
But so everybody, I think the productivity gains are kind of clear. Then efficiency gains, I mean, you're talking about, well, if it can do this really well, then maybe I can use it to kind of do that more and stop other people from doing that particular task. Like if it's something simple as, and I'll just stick with the world of writing and editing, but if it's like you have you're hiring people to proofread and edit things, well, you shouldn't be doing that anymore, because the efficiency from AI is ridiculous, right? You can just upload things and you can get it proofed and edited perfectly well, with no problems at any time from any of these models, right? And it's all basic stuff. But what I really mean by the opportunity opener, right, is that when you really kind of start to understand that generative AI is not a search engine, right? Generative AI is now Google. It's not going to give you answers to things. Generative AI is giving you answers that it thinks you want based on patterns that you give it, right? It's a big pattern matching thing. And the more kind of interesting your questions are, the more complex your inquiries are, the more interesting the patterns and the more and responses become that you get. And you can continue along that path of well, I'm going to ask it something interesting, to a point where you are writing or asking it or telling it to do things. And that's called prompting. People who don't know, where you're creating these incredible prompts that then help you to work side by side with the AI as a partner. And Ethan Mollick, who's at the Wharton School, and he's definitely one of the leading thinkers in the world of what you can do with generative AI. It's not about like, he's not the technologist, but he is absolutely deep in it. He's written this great book called Co-Intelligence. And it's not a long read. I recommend anybody's interested in AI should read it. And co-intelligence just means that you should be working with AI as your co-intelligence. It gives you another brain, a second brain. And you can, work with it on what you're doing, on whatever you're doing, and then start to ask it, what do you think of this? What's, put yourself in this particular role, or, act as a, if I wanted to channel Avish, I'd say, act as a improv master and public speaker and, and expert communicator, and tell me what you think about this. And you start to converse with it as if it's a partner, right? Mm-hmm. What that does for you is it gives you new perspectives on what you're working on. And some of it, a lot of it's going to be trash, right? But you have an endless amount of fuel there. Like, you don't have to limit it to 3 answers. You can get 500 answers and choose the ones you like. But like, you can start to talk to it about, ideas and business ideas and kind of scenarios that you have in front of you or that you dream might happen. Mm-hmm. And it will give you some semblance of answers. Whether you like those answers or not, or whether they're true or not, is another story, but it gets the brain going, right? So you can discover all kinds of interesting opportunities that way.
Yeah, I've got this whole model I talk about with creativity. It takes a little time to explain, but the rough idea is you throw a pebble into a pond, and the ripples you get are the ideas. And this whole thing about making the pond more calm, so you see more ripples. But when I've done some programs, specifically with government professionals, on how they can start using AI. Yeah. And what I find is the pebble you're throwing in the pond is like your prompt for the AI. The better the prompt, the better the ideas. Kind of to your point, though, some of my best use results from AI. I use it for the writing, the end when I got to write something I don't want to write or procrastinate. Yeah. But it's when I throw an idea in there, and then I use its response as the pebble in my own pond. So yeah, I'm not, kind of to your point about co-intelligence, co-creating, I'm not, even if I start out with this mindset, my ultimate goal is not to use the AI to get the answers. It's to give me a slightly different angle or approach, which will suddenly give me a new creative idea. And this has happened yesterday. I'm working on a new keynote I'm doing in a week or so. And this is one little segment. I'm like, it's all about yes and I want to talk about yes and emotions. But I'm not exactly sure what to say about that. And so I just put it in ChatGPT. I'm like, here's what I'm writing. Here's this context of the keynote. Can you just write me a blurb about what yes and emotions are and why they're important? And it came back, and to your point, I'm not going to use any of it. But I had like one line in there. I'm like, I hadn't thought of it that way. And that opened up a whole new. So the content's all mine, but that jogged my mind in just a new direction, just nudged me in a new direction, just enough to let my creativity start flowing.
Absolutely great use case, and there's so many different use cases that are popping up, and you can, if you're a scientifically or engineering minded person, you can use it to write and check your code. I mean, there's right now you can, the latest versions especially, you can actually just start to talk to it about a business idea and say, what I'd like you to do is create is depending on which one you're using, look at the market research that's out there, create a unique idea for this, find out if this segment is valid. Then I want you to do a SWOT analysis of XYZ, and then give me the code for a basic website that's gonna represent this new company, and in the process, it will do all of these things, and you have a whole creative team at your disposal. Now, of course, not everybody's going to do that every day, but whenever I have whenever I ask myself something like, wouldn't it be great if, right? Wouldn't it be great if? Then I want to invite AI to the table there, right? I want to say, okay, I wonder what is out there, or let me expand on this idea a little bit more, and you kind of talk to my little intern that knows everything about this particular idea. So like one example the other day, I was thinking, it's very, I want to launch a new consulting business, right? I want to think about consulting with companies about AI and about, the implementation or the enablement of AI. Of course, part of that is showing people how to use it, but it's more about that AI mindset. How do people think about it? And when you change the mindset, it changes everything about how you work with it. So if I can help companies to do that, or if I can help people to do that, great. So I started to flesh this out using, I was using Claude at the time, which is the Anthropic version of ChatGPT. It's not even a version of ChatGPT anymore. It's its own thing. Mm-hmm. And, I was asking it, okay, I asked it to look at everything it knew about me. So I gave it the website for my podcast, The Trending Communicator. I gave it the website for the link to my LinkedIn profile. I uploaded my resume. And then I said, search the web as well for anything you can find out about Dan Nestle, right? Then write me an 800-word feature about how Dan Nestle is at the forefront of AI, in communications. Because I'm thinking, okay, how am I going to market myself in this way? And you know what it did? It gave me an 800-word feature piece about the greatness of Dan Nestle. And I was like, okay, it's too much puffery, but it was a start. It was a really interesting exercise because it's so hard for us to sell ourselves. So, thinking it through, I was like, okay, this is a pretty good beginning of, all right, how I might be able to position my consulting practice, because here's my strengths. Here are the things that I'm known for. Here are the things that are out there that I'm good at. And here's some of the, and by the way, here's some of the things that I've said in my hundreds of hours of podcasting, right? It pulled quotes. It pulled quotes from my transcripts that were pertinent to the topic. So I didn't ask it to necessarily do that, but it did that. And I'm just amazed every time I use it at the ideas and the opportunities that open up in my mind from working with it together as a co-intelligence.
Yeah, and I think this iterative / playful approach is so important. I think because it's seen as a business tool, and there's a lot of uncertainty, a lot of fear, a lot of misconceptions. Mm-hmm. Most people's initial ideas about AI came from either 2001 or the Terminator. Neither of which are particularly positive. So it's all like, oh,
to date us a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. I can at least say for me it was Terminator, not 2001. Yeah. But right. So let's just take a and I think it's a little easier for people who have a lot of hats to wear, like a small business person, a solopreneur, entrepreneur, because a lot of AI is good because, hey, here's a hat. I didn't go into business to wear this hat, but I have to. Oh, now AI can help me.
Right.
But let's kind of bring it down to, say, a knowledge worker, working, they've got their job, like you said, the accountant or the HR person, whoever, and they're uncertain about AI. They haven't really used it. How would you recommend they just get started with it?
Well, as it happens, I've done workshops exactly on this topic with those very groups. I've done workshops for people in HR and legal and to some extent finance. The interesting thing is they think, well, it's not really necessarily relevant to me. Legal's different, but it's not necessarily relevant to me because I'm so focused on processes, right? But that's exactly where AI is great. So how I guess to get started, the very first thing is to just change your understanding of it, right? It's to just say, and I mentioned the mindset before, you absolutely have to just wipe the slate clean a little bit first and say, I'm not, okay, just because there's a digital interface, this is not a search engine, right? This is not Google.
Yeah.
Right. And understand that you interact with it in a very, very different way. Now, you can interact with it just like you interact with Google, but believe me, you're not going to get any results from it. That's what most people do. They do that and they walk away. Oh, this is nothing, right? But once you get past the mindset and you say, oh, wait a second, I'm gonna to some degree humanize it, like think that I'm dealing with a person, anthropomorphize it, I suppose.
Yeah, I like how you said before, I'm going to talk to my little intern who knows everything.
I call it my little intern knows everything. A friend of mine calls it my smart little friend. Whatever you call it, humanize it a little bit, whatever you're comfortable with, and understand that you're dealing with an intelligence that it's in the name, artificial intelligence, right?
Yeah.
So you're dealing with something that is that's a lot broader and bigger than than any of us know, really. So get that mindset right first, and then I would start with once you have that in place, two things that have to happen in parallel. The first thing is subscribe immediately to one of the major AI platforms, right? One of the frontier models, they call them. Yeah. And the most likely one, the most common and recommended one would be ChatGPT, right? Mm-hmm. So go to OpenAI and open up a ChatGPT account if you don't have one already, because even the free version is excellent for what you need for a lot of what
I'm still on the free version. I use it a lot. Right? I'm still on the free version.
Oh, and the new ones with GPT 4.0 is fantastic, right? Mm-hmm. So, and even the free version of Claude with Sonnet 3.5, I think is the
and for people who don't know Claude, is that with a K or a C?
C. CLAUDE.ai, right? And that's from Anthropic. And Claude is fantastic. Like Claude is much better, I think, at writing and at that kind of longer form content. And all these platforms have different functions and they're changing all the time. But go to ChatGPT, open up an account. So the two things you need to do: number one, ChatGPT, one of them, open up an account, get started, right, and just play around. It gives you some, hey, try this type prompts. Play around with it, see how it goes. The second thing you need to do is learn how to prompt. Mm-hmm. And there are a lot of resources out there, right? A lot of resources out there, but you just need to remember, basically, I think, once you have the mindset right, that you're not going to use it like a search engine. You realize that you need to put a little bit of time in upfront to get the most out of your partnership with AI. Subscribe to the tool, learn how to prompt. There's a lot of models out there. I like to use one called, I just say basically give it a roll. Yep. Right. Always tell it what it is. Give it an action, give it context, like role and action to do, context around what it needs to do, and then tell it what to do, the execution. It's called the RACE model, RACE. I didn't invent that, but it works really nicely. You can go to, there's a fellow named Christopher Penn, Penn, mm-hmm. who has loads of free resources about this. Go get a basic prompting structure down, or just use your natural language, like natural conversational capability, and start talking to it. So play.
I would also think, on a sort of a circular logic, you could also ask ChatGPT, mm-hmm. what should I put in my prompts to help you give me better answers? And it will literally give you a formula on how to structure your prompts.
That's right. It will. It totally will. It'll help you. Like, that's the other thing about it is, if you don't know what to do, ask it what to do.
Yeah, and I've done that before. I'm like, what information do you need from me to write this? And it'll come back with a list of things.
Exactly. So those two things are the first things that you need to do is mm-hmm. really, well, once you have the mindset down, then just play. Right. Yeah. The third, then I would add one more though, which is like, it has to be relevant to you. So it's easy for us as creative types, as people who write things for a living, to immediately get a relevancy from AI. Right. I suppose people who are coders and like, doing kind of very, very deep process type work also have some pretty immediate relevancy. It's harder for a lot of the other corporate functions and a lot of other professionals to understand immediately how it's relevant to them. But that's because I think they've been inundated with the other use cases. So what I would do next is come up with use cases. Mm-hmm. And the use cases are basically start with things like, what tasks do I do every day or every week that take up time but don't offer me any particular value?
Yep.
Start there, right? And position your interaction with AI as that of a helpful assistant, right? How is this going to help you? So start with those use cases and, geez, I really hate writing these weekly reports. It's a pain in the neck. It's always the same thing. Well, if it's always the same thing, it's a pain in the neck, write a prompt, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a prompt ready, and then you can create those weekly reports in the same format every week in minutes rather than hours. So, and now I'm speaking from experience on that particular use case, but there's a lot of them, right? So come up with use cases and then just play. So those things, I think if you can do those things, then you're golden. And the more you spend time with it, the more you play with it, the more you'll see, wait a second, what if I could do this? What if it could do this? Keep asking yourself, wouldn't it be great if?
Yeah, and if I could add one suggestion to the use case, I think the mind, because the text format, the mind immediately goes to writing this email, writing this report. Right. And a lot of people are like, I don't do that much writing. I would say, going back to what we talked about the creative generation, is if you've got some problem, just get ChatGPT. Say, give me 10, 20 potential solutions to this. Like, if you've got an employee who you have a conflict with, like, hey, I got this employee. Here's the situation. Can you give me 20 potential things I could try to resolve the situation?
Yeah.
And so it doesn't have to be just for writing. It could be idea generation.
Yeah.
It could be code. It could be format. Like, it could be so many things.
I mean, it depends on what you like. It really depends on what you want from it. You're totally right. People tend to think of of getting an output from it that you can then take and use someplace.
Yes.
Like, and that makes sense for writing. But what about advice and consulting and things like this? When you start to ask it for advice that you can take or leave it doesn't matter. But when you start to ask it for advice, that's not something that you're going to then grab and cut and paste into a document. That's something that's going to help inform your thinking. So I think that's a great point, Avish. You need to really understand that it has those capabilities, and when you start to play, you realize that you can keep going and going and going with that to various different places.
Awesome. Well, this is great. We're kind of coming to our end of the time here. I want to ask you, I'm going to give you a chance to kind of send people to a place. And then ask you one final question. Before that, though, a quick question. Do you think that Rush is the best rock and roll band, or just one of the best rock and roll bands of all time?
One of the best. For sure. And maybe your listeners and viewers need to know that Avish and I, in full disclosure, have known each other for 3 decades.
Wow, that's crazy.
And we were in the same fraternity together. Still are, I suppose, in a meta level. And spent a lot of time together. But one of the bonds that has kept us together these many years is an insane love for the band Rush. And I dare anyone to say that it is not one of the best bands, because then you will be not welcome in my personal circle, although you're welcome to certainly talk to me about AI. But Rush,
certainly welcome to hire us for any services.
No, I jest. But Rush is one of the best bands. I mean, there's great bands coming out. There's great new bands and great old bands, but when it comes down to it, you got to ask your question. Yeah, but is it as good as Rush?
Yeah.
How does this compare to Rush?
And they're my favorite band. So for me, the answer to that question is pretty much always no. But it's like, are you close? Like, all right, you're pretty good. You're like them. So
no, we have a lot of fun with Rush. But thank you for that. And by the way, with AI, you can explore the lyrics and the music of Rush or any band that you like. There are some AI tools out there that actually you can create music in the style of or in
well, I was going to say
modes.
For AI also, if you're overly stressing it, it can also just be a tool for fun play. Like totally. I think way back earlier, I think I had it write a song about something totally random in the style of Rush, and just gave me like a Neil Peart lyrics, and it gave me like lyrics. I'm like, I can see this being a Rush song. It just
exactly.
It can be it can be a tool for fun as well.
Total fun. Yeah. So go listen to Rush and subscribe to ChatGPT. That's the two things.
Your two messages.
Yeah.
So real quick, if people want to
Yeah.
either learn more about you, listen to your podcast, or potentially engage you for some
Right.
services, what's the
Sure.
best way to do that?
LinkedIn is always the best place to find me. I'm a denizen of the LinkedIn platform. So just look for me, Daniel Nestle, on LinkedIn. I also have my podcast is the Trending Communicator. So you can just go to trendingcommunicator.com. It's TRENDINGCOMMUNICATOR.com. And I'm on most of the socials at DS as in Stephen, DS Nestle. That's most of that's
Fantastic,
where
and
I'm
I will
at.
link
But
to all
yeah,
that in the show notes and the blog page for this this episode as well.
appreciate
Awesome,
it.
Dan. I'd like to finish up with kind of one simple, well, maybe not simple, but short question. So
Mm-hmm.
one of my things, one of the reasons I do what I do is I honestly believe the world would be a better place if
Mm-hmm.
everyone just started with the default yes and instead of a yes but. I think it
Mm-hmm.
improves communication connection. So my question to you is, what is one small thing that you believe if people did, if everyone did just this one small thing, it would make the world a better place?
Well, I mean, I've been thinking a lot about this lately, actually, Avish, and
Yeah.
I think yes and could be a really helpful tool for this. I think it's listening. I think it's just pausing and listening. And uh, it is difficult to do to have to be mindfully present all the time and listen, but and 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 having a tool at your disposal like yes and, which is, I think, initially think of it like a tool that you can just start to use uh, before it becomes habit and before it becomes embedded in your mindset. Having something there will make you a better listener. I believe that is it's a great opportunity here to kind of say, when you hear somebody, when you're talking to somebody, especially in a business situation, think of how you will answer them with yes and, rather than injecting your own opinion or some other manner. And I think that would improve so many things. And I'm certainly not the authority on this or a great practitioner of it either. And I've mea culpa for so many conversations that I've stepped on and interrupted. But and
It's all right.
see
You
what I
can say
mean?
but.
No, I am very I guess enthusiastically supportive of the idea of saying yes and in those situations. And I need to train, or I should, and I want to train myself to do that better.
Well, I think it
So
comes back to also
those are
what
one.
you kind of said right at the top is you have a unearthly curiosity. And I think if more people approached conversations from curiosity versus being right, like a lot of the listening then sort of automatically happens because then even if you're interrupting to learn more, not to argue and prove your point. So
Absolutely. You're
that's
totally right.
fantastic. Well, Dan,
Yep.
this was a pleasure. Thank you so much for being on here. So everyone listening, be sure to check out Dan's LinkedIn profile, Dan Nestle, his website, dannestle.com, and his podcast, which is awesome. Dan, thank you very much, and hope to have you back on again sometime soon.
Thanks, Vish. Good to see you.
All right.